This week, U.S. President Donald Trump has lost his third national security advisor, John Bolton, over what were said to be big disagreements on U.S. foreign policy. Meanwhile, the House Judiciary Committee is deciding whether it should start impeachment proceedings against President Trump. But the Democrats' views and the strategy over impeachment remain mixed and unclear. So why has the hawkish Bolton had to leave the administration? What changes might be expected in U.S. policy? And how will turmoil in Trump's administration and division in U.S. domestic politics affect the coming election? And of course, the ongoing China-U.S. trade negotiations. To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Dr. Zhao Hai, a research fellow from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Rick Dunham, visiting scholar at Tsinghua University. We will also talk via satellite to Brian Becker, an author and host of the show Loud and Clear on Radio Sputnik, based in Washington, D.C. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to our discussion here, gentlemen. How would you interpret the move by Donald Trump? I mean, how many... This president does prove very unpredictable, and so many high-ranking officials have been sacked by him since 2 years ago. So what do you make of the candidacy for the next national security advisor?
Indeed, I think the turnover of his presidency is extremely high, and so far there have been a number of top officials in his administration being changed or sacked or just declared fired in his Twitter. And this time, same thing happened. I think it's very important to look at who's going to be the next national security advisor. But so far, we know that if you strongly disagree with President Trump and his approach in terms of foreign policy, you cannot stay long in his administration. So the next one will be following his direction and will be in line with his overall foreign policy strategy.
But that's what we understand about democracy, Rick. Democracy means you are surrounded by a diversity of views. However, it seems this president, Mr. Donald Trump, likes to enjoy bootlicking. I mean, that won't be very good for policymaking, will it?
It's generally a bad idea. I mean, if you look back at Bill Clinton, whose White House I covered, he enjoyed the debate. He sometimes didn't enjoy the public airing of the debate that his aides leaked, but most presidents, including President Bush, like that kind of debate, and then they want you to unify behind the decision of the president. This president just can't stand opposition, and particularly can't stand people who go to the press and talk about their opposition. I think that was the final sin of John Bolton, to go to the press and say that he had opposed having the Taliban come to Camp David the week before 9/11.
Very quickly, let's have some thoughts from Brian Becker, who's standing by in the D.C. Hello, Brian. Who will be the successor? I mean, who will be the next national security advisor? Before we start talking seriously, whether he or she will be fired again.
Well, there's apparently 6 candidates. I think the most important candidate could be Stephen Biegun, who was the architect of the Hanoi summit, the second summit between Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He was at the front of that summit process. He was agreeing with North Korea about the step-by-step incremental approach for a possible peace agreement on the Korean Peninsula. Day 2 of the summit, you could see Stephen Biegun was on the backbench. John Bolton had replaced him. And that day, the Trump administration, because of Bolton's urging, basically sabotaged and torpedoed a possible peace agreement. Stephen Biegun would obviously represent a very distinct, different point of view. We also have to look at the issue of Afghanistan. I mean, what was John Bolton really trying to do? It wasn't simply disagreeing with Donald Trump. He was sabotaging and torpedoing the main proposals of Donald Trump to do something prior to the 2020 election, a peace deal in Afghanistan, a possible peace deal in North Korea. It was Bolton who personally made sure that Foreign Minister of Iran, Zarif, had sanctions imposed on him. Trump was opposed to that. He wanted to talk to Iran. John Bolton represents the nemesis for Trump doing what he wants to do for 2020, which is to have some foreign policy accomplishment.
Rick and Hai, we've heard a lot about the complaints from President Trump himself, saying were it not for his opposition, the United States would have been dragged into major conflicts many, many times by John Bolton himself. Having said this, let's look at the policy disputes that the boss and John Bolton have had that may have contributed directly to the ouster of John Bolton. What are the major issues you think that sealed the fate of John, who is said to be the super hawkish guy in the cabinet?
It's probably the Afghanistan issue, just like Professor Ghanem just pointed out, that President Trump really wants to have a deal in Afghanistan to deal with the Taliban, and therefore after that withdraw American troops gradually. So that's in line with the overall international policy. So I think the fundamental difference between Donald Trump and Bolton is that Trump wants America first, but actually Bolton wants American empire first. So he is actually conservative, promoting and continuing to promote this idea that Americans should stay in many parts of the world, maintaining the global order, and also having nation-building regime change repeated in Middle East, Latin America, everywhere in the world. And on that point, I think Trump disagrees with him completely. He doesn't want
that's
to
to be the immediate catalyst that led to the ouster of John Bolton. What are the other reasons that may have added to the anger of President Trump?
Well, the two of them are just fundamentally incompatible. John Bolton is a neocon. John Bolton wants United States military involvement around the world. Trump does not. Trump said that if it were up to Bolton, we would be involved in 4 wars in America, and you can count them on your hands. North Korea, Syria, now I'm going to be like, okay, North Korea, Venezuela. Syria, Venezuela, and Iran. Right. So, and he doesn't want that. I think Iran was a major irritant because Donald Trump wants now to talk to Iran. Bolton came in because at that time the Secretary of State Tillerson was against Trump leaving the Iran deal, and Bolton was on Fox TV over and over saying Tillerson was wrong, Trump should get out. Trump liked that, but Trump fundamentally disagrees with Bolton's worldview. Bolton has been a neocon and a military interventionist, and that is not Trump. I mean, Trump's unpredictable, but he is not a neocon.
It seems both President Trump and John Bolton want to make a deal, but the end of the deal is to put America first, as Rick said wisely a few minutes earlier. Let me cross over to Brian again. What is supposed to be the job by nature of a national security advisor? His job is, of course, one for coordination, but can you elaborate a little bit more? We don't know much about the job of a national security advisor. Can, for example, Secretary Pompeo take the job of national security advisor at the same time? There have been allegations and rumors that this guy is able to, he might be the one who combines the two.
It's possible. We saw that transition with Henry Kissinger during the late 1960s. He was National Security Advisor and then became Secretary of State in Nixon's second term.
Condoleezza Rice was also another example to combine the two, right, during the Bush administration.
Indeed. The National Security Advisor job was created in the late 1940s with the National Security Council. It was actually a feature of the creation of a permanent military machine, what we now call the military-industrial complex. And it was from the get-go, during the heart of the Cold War, basically an attempt to coordinate military and civilian policy such that the president would really be functioning as the commander-in-chief of a permanent military machine in a state of endless confrontation. That's been its job. Sometimes the National Security Advisor has been weak, sometimes the person has been strong. It depends a lot on how big the personality is. What we actually have to think, though, about where we're going with the Trump administration is he's going into 2020. This is primary for Donald Trump. He has no foreign policy accomplishments. What he wants to do is be able to show that he is a peacemaker. A big part of the Republican base actually embraced his idea that America first meant not being involved in endless wars in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria. As a consequence, John Bolton has taken him in a different direction. When he said, just name Juan Guaido, the president of Venezuela, everything will fall into place. That's a failure. The position in Afghanistan, the U.S. needs to get out of Afghanistan. It's a war that cannot be won. This was a way to leave sort of, quote, honorably. John Bolton torpedoed that. Donald Trump needs some foreign policy achievement going into 2020. He's not in good shape. He needs that. He needs to be looking like a peacemaker. John Bolton made that impossible.
Hi. What are the deliverables that a national security advisor might come up with? First of all, he has to be very clear about the mission of the president ahead of the 2020 election. Now, obviously, President Trump wants to have some deliverables to impress the audiences, to impress the electorate. So do you think the marks need to be very positive, and therefore the DPRK is likely to be the next outcome in a positive way?
Well, indeed, President Trump needs a victory in the area of foreign policy. And
he's
so
looking
far,
for a win.
He's looking for a win to support his 2020 campaign, and so far he hasn't got one. And in all those areas we talked about, from Latin America to Asia to the Middle East, there's no deal so far, and things are getting worse and worse. So he needs a top advisor to advise him on how to proceed. And at this point, I don't think Bolton can do that job. But I want to emphasize that on the one hand, of course, the National Security Advisor should follow the President's lead and have a deep understanding of President's direction. However, I think he also needs to think about national security in general and protect Americans' national interest. So when that two in conflict, and that's very much what happened, Bolton has his own understanding of what U.S. national interest is, and that's very different from Donald Trump. That's why he cannot help Trump to achieve what Trump wants, which is to have some sort of a deal, at least out of North Korea or Iran, at least be able to win him the Nobel Peace Prize to compare with President Obama.
Rick, don't you think that John Bolton may have been a victim of office politics since, Secretary Pompeo was a CIA director and he's currently Secretary of State. This guy, John Bolton, was supposed to be a coordinator that puts the job of, the Pentagon, the CIA, and the State Department together in a harmonious way so that the president himself could make up his mind. But obviously, John Bolton has offended this former CIA director and Secretary of State, and therefore he got to go.
Well, he is a victim of office politics only if you define victim as somebody who went to a knife fight and lost. I mean, he has his entire career has a reputation as somebody who plays office politics, who leaks, who tries to build empires. That is not what Donald Trump wants. Donald Trump may want a yes man, but he wants somebody who is in the background. He doesn't want that person to be in the headlines. The positive headlines are for Trump. He doesn't want somebody who is getting good press, but he also doesn't want somebody who's getting bad press. He'd rather just have somebody who says, yes, sir.
Well, I think historically there's always some sort of contention between the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State. That happened during the Cold War, the Nixon's administration, and also particularly in Carter's administration. And later on was what happened during the Bush administration, and Clinton's administration also happened. So this is supposed to be normal, but the constant change, the shift of National Security Advisor is particular to the Trump administration.
Okay, Brian, let's take a look at Iran. It's been said that the ouster of John Bolton may indicate the end of a maximum pressure campaign towards Iran. Do you expect a U-turn in the U.S. diplomacy in the Persian Gulf?
Well, that will certainly be one of the two most important, or three most important things to look at. Donald Trump said during the election campaign in 2016 that the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear arms deal, was the worst deal ever. Worst deal ever. And so he came in and he scrapped the deal. But nonetheless, American influence is not increasing, it's diminishing in the Middle East, while Iran's influence is increasing. Also, the European allies of America are bristling at the cancellation of the JCPOA. They're not going along for it. They're trying to circumnavigate around it so that they can do business with Iran. It's a failed strategy, like all of the other foreign policy initiatives so far of Trump. So his option in terms of Iran is to resume some sort of negotiations, come back to the table, find some face-saving measure for himself so that he can start to negotiate with Iran, and as a consequence, maybe have some kind of a deal. Maybe it won't be the restoration of the JCPOA. That's not on the table. And the Iranians are saying they won't talk to the Americans unless they go ahead and live up to their side of the bargain and lift the sanctions. But nonetheless, Trump wants to meet with the Iranians at the General Assembly, outside the General Assembly meetings in the next couple of weeks in New York. Certainly, that would provide an opportunity for the resumption of some kind of negotiations. This is a big part of the deal. Of course, Afghanistan and Iran share a big border. There are U.S. military bases all along that border. So Afghanistan and Iran are intimately tied together in terms of going forward.
Look, here is an allegation. Here is an allegation, Brian. It's not just John Bolton who has been very tough to Iran. Kushner, the son-in-law, also talked tough about Iran because he's said to be a friend of Israel. And do you think, Kushner's voice may have been softened and his opinions may have been soft-pedaled a little bit as a result of the departure of John Bolton in the case of Iran?
Well, I think you're right. Kushner is representing really the position of the Israeli government. Netanyahu is very, very strongly against Iran. So is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia also has very close ties to Kushner and the Kushner family. It's helped the Kushner family financially. That's a strong voice. But Kushner is the son-in-law of Donald Trump. He is not like a strong, bureaucratic Washington establishment infighter the way John Bolton was. Ultimately, Jared Kushner has to step back and take his orders from Donald Trump. John Bolton wasn't in the same league.
Thank you very much, Brian, for being with us. Rick, thank you. The U.S.-China trade talk, the next round is around the corner, and I'm not sure the role that the National Security Advisor plays in shaping the future of a healthy development of trade issues. So what can you tell us about the joint efforts by Lighthizer, Peter Navarro, Pompeo, and of course John Bolton, so that the whole administration of Donald Trump may be viewed as united front?
In this case,
deliver a single voice?
Bolton was out of the loop completely on the trade talks, whether it was his own choice or that he was cut out by Pompeo and Lighthizer. Pompeo is in the background there, and Lighthizer is the most important. You can't dismiss Navarro because he is the most hawkish with China. But I think right now, if you look at the coverage over the last few weeks, Lighthizer has the upper hand, and you see signs both in Washington and in Beijing that if not an olive branch, that we're at least seeing olive leaves right now on the two sides to try to get back to talk and to stop the escalation and the counter-escalation.
Dr. Zhao, there were signs that perhaps key members of the Trump administration happened to be in the holiday mood to help commemorate the 70th anniversary of a national day, and therefore they decide to postpone the imposition of tariffs for a little while. But no one here in China, I'm afraid, trusts the alleged goodwill of the Trump administration on trade issues. So what do you think of the current development between Beijing and Washington on, what the trade war might be like in the next round?
I think ever since last time when Trump escalated this trade war and added more tariff to the imported goods from China, the Chinese side has repeatedly called for U.S. side to show some goodwill gestures and to create conditions, favorable conditions for continuing negotiations between the two sides. And I think Trump administration probably listened, and now they sort of echoing China's request and decided to take care of to postpone the next round of tariffs until after the national holiday. And I think Chinese side also take the signal, and there are voices saying that China is asking the price of agricultural products from U.S. side, and I think China will reciprocate if the negotiations going well to continue to purchase to restore the purchase of American goods.
Probably if we look at the issue of trade in a broad context, we have the strong feeling that the United States is coming under pressure from continental Europe and also the UK after Brexit, because the Europeans are pursuing their own independent economic policy during the US absence of leadership. So what do you make of this third factor that may have affected the US-China trade relationship?
Well, I think the EU is collectively holding its breath, because one advantage for Europe of having Trump declaring trade war on China is that he's not putting tariffs on the EU. Having the US step back from leadership on global trade has meant that the Europe-EU-Chinese relationship, the German-Chinese relationship, is more important. You have Trump and you have Boris Johnson and Brexit. And so I say trade is a very complex issue, but at this point, I think that the EU would rather overall have this trade war end, but I think the EU is worried because Trump has threatened tariffs on agricultural and auto products from Europe.
Dr. Zhao, many people who follow the development of EU-China relations may have been impressed by the recent official visit by Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, who, despite the pretty noisy protests in Hong Kong, brushed aside criticisms and opposition that come from within the German media and parliament, still came over and signed a contract with the Chinese authorities on further economic cooperation. Having said this, South Korea and China may have also turned to China for the job of mediation when the two countries in our neighborhood were locked in animosity on trade, territorial disputes. So what do you think of the role that China plays in, benefiting from this kind of friction and tensions?
Well, I think the U.S.-China trade war is hurting everybody, and actually China and the U.S. can weather this better than other countries, major exporting countries, particularly like South Korea and Germany. If you look at the numbers, those two countries are on the verge of recession, or sometime probably already in the recession. So that's why I think they need to try to push both sides, on the U.S. side and on the Chinese side, to end this trade war as quickly as possible. At the same time, I think Germany wants to increase its export to China, and Chinese side also said that President Xi promised to open up the door even bigger for Germany and European companies. So in that respect, I think China is willing to play a bigger role in regional and global trading system and promote further the free trade idea.
That also makes clear it's very, very difficult to decouple Chinese market given the importance of China in the global supply chain. Let's turn to yet another interesting issue, something that is currently discussed by Democrats to impeach President Trump. What are the reasons for triggering the recent discussions about impeachment?
Well, there are two sets of issues. One is a majority of Democrats in the House of Representatives now favor moving forward with impeachment inquiries. That's different than impeachment. And I think Nancy Pelosi, though she does not believe that now is the time to impeach Trump, does understand that this is a months-long process. And so they are going to trigger the beginning of investigations, particularly the House Judiciary Committee. Basically, it just means intensive oversight and to draw up possible charges against Donald Trump, which go all across the board, from his personal business deals to unfair or illegal use of executive privilege. One thing legally that triggering the impeachment inquiry would do is that it strengthens the Democrats' case in legal cases going up to the Supreme Court, where Trump says that he has the right and the executive power to deny Congress documents. If there's an impeachment inquiry, that's in the Constitution, and it lessens the strength of his case that he can just stonewall Congress.
Dr. Zhao, let's look at the three major reasons that are said to have contributed to the decision by Democrats to impeach their president or start the process of impeachment. Number one is possible violations by the president of the emolument clause. Number two, reports of Trump's offering pardons to officials at risk in breaking immigration laws. And number three, his involvement in hush money payments. I mean, Stormy Daniels. So what do you think of these three issues?
Well, I think the threshold for impeachment is very high in American Constitution. So even though the Democrats picked these three topics to pursue further and to push forward with the impeachment, I think the main goal is not to use this to actually reach the goal of impeachment, but running a parallel show with the United States next round of national campaign so that the information will roll out at the same time when the campaign is going on, so that voters will be influenced by the process of this impeachment. As Rick already pointed out, when the documents slowly but clearly shows that Trump is violating law after law and benefiting himself because of the presidency, then they intend to lower his support, and the ultimate goal actually is to win the next election instead of really achieve the impeachment, because they know the Senate is still in the hands of the Republicans.
So do you think there's an alternative agenda behind the decision of Democrats to start the process of impeachment, namely the 2020 election?
Yes, I mean, Nancy Pelosi has said that the best way to get rid of Donald Trump is to defeat him at the ballot box in 2020. And I think that to help Democrats defeat him at the ballot box, there will be a year's worth of hearings into wrongdoing or stonewalling or obstruction of justice, obstruction of Congress, obstruction of the courts. And so I think that the Democrats see it as a win-win as long as they don't overplay their hands and look like they're just on a fishing expedition. But if they're very specific about the charges, as in the emoluments, about having people stay at Trump properties to enrich himself, which is against the Constitution of the U.S., that the president should profit from the office. Things like that could benefit the Democrats.
It seems the issue of a Russian gate scandal has been put to an end. But tell me very quickly, Rick, what do you know about how Bill Clinton, former U.S. president, have been able to survive that impeachment act by the Congress?
He survived because, first, he continued as president. He didn't let it stop him. Secondly, he survived because Republicans did not have the two-thirds majority in the Senate. Impeachment is a political act. It only needs a majority of the House. Democrats could impeach Trump like that. I mean, it wouldn't be any problem. But two-thirds in the Senate, and that's what Bill Clinton knew the votes weren't there, and he just continued to act as president rather than get caught in the politics.
But at the defining moment about his future as president of the United States, it seems Hillary Clinton played an important role. She took side with her hubby at the critical moment and showed the solidarity and loyalty to the husband. What do you think of the role the wife played at the critical moment? Because they are said to be a power partnership.
Yes, but also after that, you can imagine the national backlash towards Hillary Clinton. That's why one time after another, she couldn't run successfully as the U.S. president, and again failed. But then at this time, if same thing happened, I don't think Trump's wife will help him in that way.
Melania will play a different role. By the way, in her autobiography, Hillary Clinton said, when it came to the issue of Lewinsky, she said she wanted to wring the neck of Bill. Well, that's scary. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.